The 1885 Garcia, Espinosa, Garland Ranch headquarters is located in southeastern Conejos County, 3.5 miles east-northeast of the county seat of Conejos and 5 miles south-southwest of Manassa. The ranch lies between the Conejos and San Antonio rivers in an area of the county known as La Isla, the island.
I am Reyes Roberto Garcia. I was named Reyes after my great-grandfather, who was Reyes Gonzalez. I was born in 1946, so I am 76 years old as of July 30th. In 1883, the federal government gave to the state of New Mexico some of the land that had been part of the Conejos land grant. The Conejos land grant was a Mexican land grant of 2 million acres that went from San Antonio Mountain all the way up to La Garita in the north, and then the east and west boundaries were the San Juans, and then the Rio Grande. So it was this huge area. And the land grant, like almost every Spanish and Mexican land grant, was not legitimated by the U.S. Congress. It's like, well, there's a history of that. The legal system of the United States is based on the English legal system, which doesn't account for and doesn't recognize communal property. The only communal property in the United States is the commons in Boston and the commons in San Luis over here. Otherwise, only private property is recognized. And the Roman tradition recognizes communal property, which is the Spanish and Mexican legal tradition. So that's why the Spanish and Mexican governments were able to give huge land grants to communities, communal land grants. So all the communal land grant land was federalized. And that was a huge problem because people, like my family used to take their animals up to the mountains for free because they were heirs to the land grant. But my great-grandfather, Jose Victor, was lucky that when the federal government gave back to the state of Colorado some of the land that was in the land grant, that included land along the Conejos River, including this ranch, this 360-acre ranch. So in 1883, my great-grandfather, Jose Victor, whose photograph is on the cover of Pleas and Petitions, was the first citizen of the new state of Colorado to buy land from the state that was given to the state by the federal government that had been part of the Conejos land grant, which was disallowed by U.S. Congress. He was able to essentially buy this ranch and reacquire a portion of the land grant that he was an heir to, but which he was not allowed to inherit. So that is how this ranch originates as private property. And then he transferred title of this ranch to his younger son, whose name was Celestino Garcia, who was the younger brother of my grandfather, Jose Amarante, who had his own land to the south, to the west of here. So the next couple of ranches for the next 3 miles along the river were my grandfather's, Jose Amarante. So that's the story of how this land here got to be part of the Garcia properties. But then Celestino, my great uncle, died, and his widow evidently got behind in taxes. And then some other Espinosa, I think, family acquired this place. And then after Espinosa, Garland. And so Garlands were here for 2 generations. And my brother bought this ranch from Jack Garland, who was retiring. So I've lived here since 1983. and have slowly learned the history of this ranch. So what I'm telling you now, I've just learned the history of this ranch since Tom Simmons, the archaeologist and preservationist, did the proposal to put this house and the potato barn and the outhouse that's out there on the National Register of Historic Places. So I learned a lot of this history through Tom. And then my younger daughter, Tanya, who did that self-portrait, has been studying family history. So when I first moved here, it was my two cousins who owned the next two ranches. And then after that, on the other side of the highway, my Garcia cousins still own Garcia land. That was our great-grandfather, Jose Victor, and our grandfather, Jose Amarante's land. And so my cousins, they're like third cousins still. Me and they and I are the only ones of the Garcias that still own the original Garcia lands. But this ranch that I live on is the first Garcia ranch that was acquired. The valley is my home, where I was born, and my grandfather and great-grandfather Garcias were born either here or nearby in the area that's called San Juan de los Caballeros, which is across the river from Oquea-Wingue, or San Juan Pueblo. That's just outside of Espinosa. So the Garcias came here from down south after the Mexican-American War, which ended in 1848. And so the United States annexed half of Mexico, which, as you know, includes Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah. And when Mexico tried to retake Texas from the independent country of Texas, there was the Alamo, and the Mexicans won. But then the United States intervened, and the Mexican-American War ended. So it was shortly after, in the 1850s, actually it was in the late 1840s, that people started, Spanish-speaking people started settling in this part of the valley over there in Conejos and Guadalupe, and some of the other little villages like San Antonio and Ortiz to the south, some of which are right bordering New Mexico. And then my family came here to where we are in the 1850s. So in the historic district, which includes 62 acres between the ditches, because ditches can't go on the National Register, so everything between the ditches includes the potato barn, the outhouse, and this house that we're in now are on the National Register of Historic Places. But there are also within that historic district a set of corrals that are nearby, which are not on the National Register, of course, but part of the property. That's what you would see. The potato barn, as you drive in, as Kim said, it's 77 by 40 feet, so it's massive. And then this house is massive. It's like 3,600 square feet. And they're both made of double adobe walls. So this house doesn't have an airspace between the two adobe walls.
This particular ranch has 6 contributing buildings, meaning they all have some relationship, either architecturally or operationally, with those main buildings like this house that are character-defining buildings in the historic district. So they relate to what we call the period of significance as well, of historic significance. The other thing that's really interesting about this particular one is because this ranch is on the National Register of Historic Places as a district, there are other ranches that are on the National Register, but this is the only one that we know of that has a potato barn on it, despite the fact that there are over 130 potato barns in the valley. My name is Kim Grant, and I'm a historian and a historic preservationist. And I'm the former director of a program called Colorado's Endangered Places for Colorado Preservation, Inc. And so I've worked in the field of historic preservation for a long time. And more recently in the last 5 to 7 years, got involved with preservation efforts down here in the San Luis Valley, and that's how I found out about the Garcia Espinosa Garland Ranch, where we are today, hosted by Reyes Garcia. And it's a fascinating place, it's a fascinating region, and most of the sites that are on the endangered places list are singular buildings or structures, or maybe a larger site, maybe a cultural landscape of some sort. But in 2019, we listed the adobe potato cellars or barns of the San Luis Valley as a regional type resource. So there's multiple listings associated with that kind of a resource. And so that's how I got involved with exploring what the history and the stories behind the buildings and the people down here. So it's been a labor of love, and this particular property, I've had the pleasure of being here a few times, and it's just a beautiful place and a beautiful story. The adobe potato cellar or barn that's on this property is a very unique one. We know that there are more than 130 of them in the San Luis Valley. And a few years ago, a graduate student at Adams State University did a master's thesis where she went out and identified and located and surveyed 117 of them. And that's how they ended up being nominated and listed on the endangered places list. And then that's how I got to visit this particular potato barn. And this one here is, I believe, 77 feet long by 40 feet wide. And it's oriented north-south. Something like 70% of all the potato barns in the valley are oriented north-south for good reasons, because we're storing agricultural produce, and for access and protection and other reasons. That's how most of them are set up. Most of them have 2 entries. Most of them are ventilated in some way, and they often have really unique roof forms. This particular potato barn is a really unique barn. It has characteristics of the other ones, but it's also large and very long, and it has a wood roof, and it has that double-walled pocket construction. It has 3 sets of double doors that are really finely crafted. Whoever put those together, they're kind of plank-style doors, I believe. And whoever put them together was a fine carpenter. And they're hinged with metal hinges, and they're still in pretty good shape. And so that's another unique feature. And another common thing that happened was it started out with a gambrel roof and then it expanded into a peaked shape roof as it was made bigger. And you can see that when you look at the front facade of the building, or the south-facing facade.
So in 1983, the house was in similar condition, but deteriorated. Some of the adobe walls on the south side had been infested with wasps. So there was like a whole layer of adobe bricks. One of the layers of adobe bricks was eaten away on the south side of the house, behind a big row of lilac bushes. And then the cedar shingle roof was badly deteriorated, dried out and broken. And those back rooms where my new bedroom and kitchen and bathroom are was a storage area that I had some of my furniture, but there was also other stuff from the Garlands that was there. And there were mice, and it was really a mess. It just didn't look the same as now, because the interior walls, the paint was peeling a little bit, and the main thing was the roof, and the plumbing system wasn't working very well, because there was a well in the old bathroom that was, I think, 20 feet deep. And one winter, the well went dry, and I actually had to go to the corrals with aluminum trash cans in the back of my truck and fill those with water, and then bring them to the house to use for a whole winter. So it was bad, like in that regard too. It was hard to live here for many years. And the windows were really thin pane windows. So now the whole house has thermal pane windows. All the windows were replaced with double pane windows. And then the attic, the ceiling, there's insulation in the ceiling. So the house now is highly insulated. And I made a fire last night, kept it going till 10, 11 o'clock. And this room stays 60 degrees all the time, even when it's really cold. Well, the restoration of the house meant a great deal to me and my daughters, and to some of the other people in the area. Like I have a friend named Sofia Marquez, who's probably the best Chicana architect in the world. And as an architect, she said, you really did a good thing restoring this house because it's classic territorial New Mexico architecture. And it's very rare to see a house like this on this side of the border. When you go down to New Mexico, you see that all the houses have steel roofs like this one, which used to have cedar shingles. And of course, the potato barn has a cedar shingle roof, which is totally deteriorated, leaking. So the first priority in restoration of the potato barn is to replace the roof with metal shingles that look like cedar shingles. I had wanted them to put a roof on the potato barn that would match my house, which is, a steel roof. And the historic preservationists at History Colorado and State Historical Fund said, no, that wouldn't be authentic because the barn had cedar shingles, so we'll make a compromise. Because I insisted, it's got to have a metal roof, got to have a metal roof. It's New Mexico architecture. You drive down to New Mexico, all the buildings have steel roofs, or tin. They're all rusted. So the compromise was metal shingles that look like cedar shingles.
Well, one of the unique things about the potato cellars is that the materials are locally sourced, and most of them were built by the people who owned the land. And it's adobe, which is a mixture of mud and straw and water, and formed into bricks, and 2 walls of bricks with an air pocket in many cases, and stacked. And then you have different roof structures with vigas and latillas and earthen covering, often mud or dirt, and in some cases sod, other cases using milled lumber, and others were also built out of concrete or concrete block, but in many cases those weren't sourced locally like the adobe is. Well, I think preserving these kinds of places is what gives our communities and our regions their distinctive identities and their character. And I think in the modern world, the landscape is being erased at a very rapid pace. There's so many threats to historic resources. It could be just indifference and neglect or abandonment. It could be weatherization. The freeze-thaw cycle is hard on buildings. It could be development pressures along the Front Range. And all these things kind of work to alter the landscape very quickly and in ways that once it's gone, it's gone. And with that, you sometimes lose the stories of the people behind it, the people who came here, the people who built these communities. And of course, this is a very unique part of Colorado in that it's really the oldest part of Colorado. And with heavy patterns of Hispano settlement coming up from Mexico and New Mexico, and people who really put their stamp on the character of the area. And I think it's important to maintain it, celebrate it.
And so it was a pleasure when I was asked to give a tour of the potato barn to all these people that came from all over the country. So about 200 people showed up, and I gave a talk. Kim gave a talk. Barbara Darden, the architect, gave a little talk. And just before that, I had talked to the son of Jack Garland, who grew up in this house. And I called him to tell him that his old home was now in the National Register of Historic Places, along with the potato barn. And what do you know about the potato barn? He said, my father, when he was a young man, helped build the barn beginning in like 1941. Done research on the house and the barn and the property, and it makes me feel even more at home to know how this came to be owned by the Garcias. It's my great grandfather, great uncle, and then my brother, and then me.
For preservation to be a part of people's experiences in the future, we have to transmit it to future generations. And we also have to have people like Reyes Garcia who are willing to restore and put their money and resources into their home, their ranch, and be willing to work with people that can bring additional resources to help with like the potato barn and things like that. And that's what it takes in the end. It's some sweat equity and some resources and some labor, and that's also what helps keep those craft traditions and building trades going as well. So it's all important. Well, historical context is really important, and it's something that's kind of lacking on the part of a lot of Americans. Maybe because of underappreciation of history, but at the same time we spend thousands and thousands of dollars to travel all over the world and look at houses that are 700 years old or ruins that are 3,000 years old or whatever, but we have this incredible history right in our own backyard. And I think it's just ripe for rediscovery by people.